Hi, Greg. Thank you for being the keynote at TCS Innovation Forum 2019 New York. It's great to listen to your speech, your insights. TCS, as you know, we have been driving this principle of Business 4.0, a new way of doing business, exceptional customer experience, exponential business models, ecosystems to drive value, and lastly, embracing risks so that they can try different things quickly. Which of these four behaviors do you see as significant based on your experience?
Well, great to be here, and thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me. So I think there's been great energy in the room today and a lot of really interesting conversations. And I think that what we're seeing is that we're entering a new period of, I think, interdisciplinary sort of technologies really having an impact on each other. So I think that while there's a lot of talk about sort of some technologies like artificial intelligence or blockchain or whatever it might be, being the kind of the next big thing, I think that we're going to see all these technologies coming together and accelerating their journey and their applications. So to sort of like just to hone in on maybe what on the question, I think that the key to is always going to be what does the customer want? So the customer always has to be that central focus. And you and I might get really excited about what quantum can do in the future and how it's going to impact, I don't know, all kinds of areas like cryptography or whatever. But actually, it's always going to be the customer that has to be our central focus and think about what are their needs rather than our excitements, if that makes sense.
So customer first still stays, and that's true for 5,000 years of business, I guess. So
I think you're right, yeah, and I think that it probably will be for a long time. And I think that what we're seeing is that, you know, with so many technology businesses, you know, they are really thinking about sort of like new ways of making that sort of like customer journey, that customer acquisition, whatever that might be, as simple and as seamless and as fluid as possible, and also showing real kind of aptitude at figuring out where the value lies. So like really digging into where the kind of like the problems are that businesses are encountering and organizations are encountering, and figuring out, okay, what can we do? What are our sort of our specialities and our technologies and our capabilities that will allow the kind of like smoother business processes, and also to show them how to find new opportunity. I think that, you know, often we think about maybe sort of some of the challenges or the problems that we encounter, and actually I think what's interesting is seeing so many of these technologies can be applied in new ways to really kind of offer opportunity and new ways of doing things.
So in that plethora of choices, startups have the luxury of what they call doing a pivot. Right, which means I had no idea that this was coming and I just changed my whole business model. How does a large enterprise bring agility into its mindset, thinking, and finally execution?
That's a really great question, and I think I should start off by saying it's a really, really hard thing to do. So I talked about a large bank during my presentation and the way that it's you know, under attack, as it were, from startups that are multiple startups that are attacking very small segments of its business. So there's the ways that you can do this. Obviously, you can kind of acquire those startups. That's one way of doing it. One way is to innovate yourself and to try and create those products and services yourself. And the other way that you can do it is to integrate them into your business model. But I think that probably the best way to do it is to try and create a culture of innovation. Now, such an easy thing to say, but a really difficult thing to do. Now, from some of the organizations that I've talked to that have managed to do this in a successful way, one way is to ensure that teams are pretty small and that they have a high degree of freedom and that they are autonomous in some kind of way. They have accountability, but they're able to operate in ways that enable them to sort of think differently and maybe not think, well, we've got a quarterly earnings report in 2 months, we have to deliver X, Y, and Z projects. Because I think that probably true innovation, as we see in the academic world, big breakthroughs, they take time, they take resource, and that doesn't mean to say that there shouldn't be targets, but I also think that you need to give, you know, for that kind of big creative thinking to happen, it needs time and it needs space.
So a new opportunity, therefore, for companies and enterprises is, on one side, you have a plethora of technology choices. The second, you have the ability now to start responding to these. And you spend a fair bit of time, I would say, educating the audience and perhaps scaring them about the possibilities of AI and robotics, right? And there were some very interesting angles in that. On one side, the capability, on the other side, the ethics, and lastly, the rate of adoption of some of these. So what does a machine-first world look like in your perspective?
That's a great question. I think we're to some degree living in a machine-first world already. I think that's only going to increase over the years. I think that there are multiple challenges in this, but I think that when it gets really interesting is when we almost stop noticing the machines any longer. So I gave an example of a large retailer in the United States that's introduced these small robots into its stores. These things just rove around the aisles. They scan products to see if they need replenishing. And I think it was MIT did a piece of research where they went to these stores where they've been implemented. There were 50 in the South. And initially people were very excited about them, and they were photographing them and they were putting the videos on YouTube. The researchers went back 18 months later. None of the customers were paying any attention to the robots any longer. The robots were just going about their business. And what I think is really interesting is like when we don't see the technologies any longer, when they're just there and they serve our needs. So you and I got in an elevator this morning to come down from our hotel rooms. We didn't even think about it. 120 years ago, that would have been a big deal.
Mm-hmm. So just blending agile, the human side and the machine, so they're both comfortable with each other.
Yes.
And that's innovation in an agile machine-first world. Thank you again, Greg, for a wonderful keynote and for doing this interview.
Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.